Hello and welcome to another edition of Outro, the show about shows, the show dealing with shows, right here on the writer Albert Lanier channel. I, of course, am the writer Albert Lanier, here to tell you about another development, another interview on another show, which, of course, would be fine for Outro. And speaking of interviews on shows, today, because I'm taping this on February 2nd, which was the same day that I did the show. I always try to do that with Outro. I try to not tape, but I'm going live the same day. I always try to do the episodes of the show after I've done after I've done an interview. And today I kicked off what will be my awards season media tour. By awards season, of course, I'm talking about film awards because it's Oscar season. And so the Oscars, of course, are on March 15th on ABC, Sunday, March 15th, ABC. And um, I will be doing interviews discussing this year's Oscars and the movies of 2025 on a number of shows. And the first show that I was on was the Mind of Cy Marie podcast. Now, if that sounds familiar to those who follow this show or followed me, that's because I was on the Mind of Cy Marie podcast last year. And during my promotional tour for my um, Substack newsletters and my podcast. So I was on the show. And one of the reasons that I returned was because um, it was a good show and the questions were really good. There were some thoughtful, excellent questions, and I was not disappointed. And I was quite happy, not disappointed at all. Coming on the show again today, we discussed primarily about three films, largely, and horror movies primarily. I think she was interested in discussing about horror movies. The movie Sinners, the movies Weapons, and Frankenstein. Weapons, I think, has one nomination. Frankenstein has several, and of course, Sinners has 16. So we discussed those three movies um, on the Cy Marie podcast. You can catch that. It's on Substack. So go to Substack to check that out. She also has a newsletter on Substack. You can check that out too if you want. But, you know, I was doing, so I did the show. I had a great time doing the Mind of Cy Marie, and it was a nice kickoff to the media tour that I'm doing. It's going to be a busy week, so I'll probably be doing more episodes of Outro this week because I've got interviews scheduled all throughout the week. I've got one tomorrow, maybe one on Wednesday, and definitely one on Thursday. So it was a great way to do it. I don't. I normally when I talk about when I'm on the show, as people know from watching this show or watching this series, I talk a certain amount about it, but not too much. Um, I think one of the interesting things about the interview was, getting to talk a little about horror movies. And I think it's a better, it's kind of an unusual year with the Oscars in that you have about three of these horror movies, and they're all kind of different kinds of horror movies. Frankenstein, Guillermo del Toro's film, is more gothic horror. It's adaptation of Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley's novel, a very famous novel. You've got Weapons, which is contemporary horror, and I think you've got Sinners, which is more, and I said this on the show, it's more a cultural drama mixed with music embedded within a horror movie. So um, that's the thing. So there are three very different horror movies. I myself, for example, I think that Sinners is a more interesting horror movie than sorry, that Weapons is a more interesting horror movie than Sinners. I think Sinners is less interesting as a horror movie and more interesting as kind of a cultural folklorish drama. And I think that's where its resonance and its power comes from. And so I felt that Sinners is like not really a pure horror movie. Weapons to me is a far more interesting horror movie because of the multiple stories within the film, and how these characters had their own story. Like several of them have their own stories, not storylines per se, but stories really. And that's one of the things is the multiple stories within Weapons that made it such an interesting film. And I said this on the show, and I'll say it here. I'm interested in the next film. I don't know what Zach Krager is going to do for his next movie, but I'm really interested in seeing what his next movie is going to be. I'm really interested because I thought Weapons was a really good debut film, really wonderful debut, um, and a strong one, especially in terms of the writing, very strong. And so I'm kind of, so it was really interesting to kind of get into the sort of different kinds of movies. And these are all three different kinds of horror movies. And you don't really see horror really represented in at the Oscars. That's a genre that the Oscars just don't really seem that interested in, except with the exception of certain years, like when The Exorcist got a bunch of nominations. Didn't win too many films, but got a bunch of nominations. And I think Silence of the Lambs, but Silence of the Lambs is as much a thriller as I think it's a horror movie. It's not a pure horror movie. But I would say that it's a really interesting year for horror movies. Really interesting one. And so, and these three are, I think, a great representation. I can see why they got, you know, um, Oscar nominations. I know Sinners broke the record with 16 nominations. I didn't see that one coming. To be honest, I didn't see that one coming. I'll be really honest. I don't think Sinners has done that well, in the awards, during the awards season. So I don't know how well it will do in the Oscars. My gut instinct, and I don't really, I'm not somebody who predicts the Oscars so much. But my gut instinct is telling me that I think that Sinners will probably win a lot of technical awards or a number of technical honors, or a few of them. I don't think it's going to win Best Picture. I don't think it's going to get a lot of the other awards, but I think it may sweep in the tech categories and the other craft categories. So I think that's what's going to happen with Sinners. That's just my take. I'm not really into making predictions about the Oscars and all that sort of thing. What I do since I've come back to writing about films is I trend track. So I track trends in regards to, you know, movies and especially awards and award winning films. So, so I enjoyed going on the show. It was a very good interview, and I recommend checking it out. It's called the Mind of Cy Marie podcast. It's on Substack. Check it out. She also does a newsletter. You can check that out if you want. But check out the podcast. The title of it is Oscars 2026. That's Oscars 2026, title of the episode. And that's the Mind of Cy Marie podcast. And that's been it for this edition of Outro, the show about shows, showing you that it's time to sign off. Bye, folks.